Hello, my Bill 1000 Nation. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully, everyone's having a great day. If not, I hope it gets better from here. We are back with another Coffeehouse Crime. This one was actually requested by a subscriber. It is titled, Students Recorded Their Final Moments Alive. Yeah, alright. I'm not all that excited to get into today's story. I'm a little nervous. If you guys are, as nervous as I am, don't turn your lights down low. Go ahead, turn your lights down low. Put on something comfy, cuddle up with someone special. Let's get horrifically traumatized.
A series of fatal errors and negligent decisions would lead to one of the worst marine tragedies in modern-day history, and this video will show you exactly what happened. Instead of submerging in an instant, this ferry took multiple hours to sink into the LOC, all while its passengers were reassured that things would be okay. And with more than 200 students on board, many unknowingly recorded their untimely demise. Years after the tragedy, a complex operation pulled the ship out of the water, revealing a haunting shipwreck with many secrets within. But what happened to MV Sewol? Who is responsible for more than 300 deaths? And what terrible mistakes were made? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're heading to South Korea to look at the dark case of the Sewol ferry disaster. Call it a personal vendetta, but I hate the ocean. I mean, kayaking is one of my favorite hobbies, and I love being on planes. But put me in a boat, or in deep waters, absolutely not. Now, I guess you could say that I'm just simply not built for it. That, and I get wildly seasick whenever I'm put on a boat. So when I say that this story will leave you panicked, I am simply speaking from experience.
Now, see, I am the exact opposite way. I don't like planes. I love boats. I love being on the water. I love being in the water. I don't have wings. I don't want to fly. I can use my arms and legs to swim all day long. No matter how much I paddle them arms and legs, I ain't fucking flying. I don't want to be in the air.
The way, Coffeehouse Crime is all about true crime, strange and chilling stories, and the best way to help support me is by subscribing to the channel. So, if you like true crime and you think that I should finally change the price of my honey oat latte, then please hit subscribe now.
$4 for a honey oat latte. Yeah, I'd change that. $3.75, bud. $3.75. $3.62.
By the way, I respond to most comments in the first hour of my video going live, so if you'd like to catch me for a question or a comment, then please hit the bell notification. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of the Sewol ferry disaster. Welcome back to Seoul, folks. And of course, I'm talking about the capital of South Korea. Home to nearly 10 million people and arguably the birthplace of the internationally renowned K-pop, this city is brimming with vibrance. Many exciting things await for you in a place like Seoul, and futuristic appeal aside, here we can also find the royal
My whole day is ruined already. Fucking K-pop.
Gyeongbokgung Palace. And for those interested to see something even more traditional, you can check out Bukchon Hanok Village, which has been preserved to represent a village more than 600 years old. For those of you who want to take in the sights and sounds, I'd recommend a walk along the Cheonggyecheon River, which incidentally is a bloody good score if you can spell it out in a game of Scrabble. Moving closer to our case today, we head southwest of Seoul and to Ansan City, found in Gyeonggi Province. With a population of just over 640,000 people, it has a strong bias towards the industrial and manufacturing facets of the country's economy. For budding tourists, they can explore the famous botanical gardens, the lake park, and the Museum of Modern Art. Now, although I could talk about South Korea for days, our case today pulls us away from land and into its waters. But before we embark on our maritime journey, we must turn our heads to Danwon High School. Danwon High School, to no real surprise, exists in the Danwon district of Ansan. During the early months of 2014, a large group of students were preparing for a school trip, and this trip would involve a ferry journey on the MV Sewol. Now, Sewol was your basic run-of-the-mill ferry. The vessel that would end up as the MV Sewol had her keel laid down in 1994 in Nagasaki, Japan, and was what is known as a ropax ferry. This is a combination of roll-on, roll-off, where cars can drive on and off of a vessel, and pax being a term for passengers. Acronyms aside, it was a ferry that took both vehicular and pedestrian passengers, and with an
I have been on one of those one time my whole life, and it was the coolest fucking thing ever. Ever. I'm a weird individual. Little weird thing. I love boats and trains. I don't know why. I fucking one day I would like to actually ride on like a train that you can sleep on, like, you know, one of those sleeper car type deals, and just, oh, that would be so cool. So fucking cool.
overall length of 146 meters or 479 feet, and a width of 22 meters or 72 feet. She had a 956 person capacity, which included 921 passengers plus additional crew. She began her working life as Ferry Nomino in Japan, remaining in service between 1994 and 2012 without any notable accidents or incidents. It was in the year of 2012 that Chonghai Jin Marine purchased the ship for just over the equivalent of £9 million or $12 million. After this, it went straight into dry dock, undergoing several changes and improvements. Sewol's capacity was increased for both gross tonnage and number of passengers, and after having 2 additional decks installed, she was certified to carry an extra 240 gross tons. Now, it should be noted that this is not unusual in the maritime world. Many vessels are built to standards set at the time, and as the years pass by, they are deemed capable of carrying more. Whether that is regulations changing or simply a better understanding of the engineering behind them, an older vessel being modified and then recertified to a larger capacity is entirely normal. One important side note, but it has been claimed that paperwork and recertification for the Sewol had been fabricated. However, there is no evidence to prove this. But sadly, as we are about to find out, and as is often the case, a vessel's capacity and ability can do little in the face of human error. Our case today takes us to the evening of April 15th, 2014. Sewol had been operating in South Korean waters for just over a year now. Unfortunately, during this time, it would later become apparent that laziness and negligent behavior had become commonplace by the crew that operated her. The regular nature of their operations had fooled the crew into a false sense of security, and with their reliable ship operating in calm and predictable waters, standards slowly began to slip. In fact, they were slipping to the point where potentially deadly mistakes had been all but normalized. But it was on April the 15th, 2014, on its 244th trip doing the same route as always, that it all came to a devastating head.
Damn.
Deporting the part of Incheon with 443 passengers, the MV Sewol was filled with less than half of the 921 she was certified to carry. Of these 443 passengers, 325 were Danwon High School students. The ferry also had 5 tourists on board, with the rest being general commuters and holidaymakers. It would later become clear that there were multiple things already wrong with the MV Sewol as she got underway. Despite the low number of passengers, she was overburdened by an accumulative weight of more than 2 times her registered limit. Now, this wasn't the first time this had happened. On a few occasions, Sewol had carried more than 3,600 tons of cargo, which is more than 3 times its limit of 987 tons. So, when she was only taking 2,215 tons on this fateful day, the crew thought it was a walk in the park, despite being over double its limit. Some cargo was not secured correctly either, meaning it was liable to shift while on high seas. This would also adversely affect the ship's stability and its center of gravity if it were to roll too much. Additionally, the 2 extra passenger decks and increased cargo capacity had already made Sewol less stable than initially designed. Now, a ballast is usually used to help counter this problem. It is often simply water that is held in large tanks at the bottom of the ship, which adds weight and stability by lowering the vessel's center of gravity. So, this is Probably one of the most ridiculous and stupid ideas I've ever heard, but on this day, the crew decided to remove most of the ship's ballast water to help compensate for the extra cargo weight. By the way, Captain Shin, who was the ship's previous master, had previously reported that the ship's stability was poor and seemed to be getting worse. Sadly though, the company did not take his concerns seriously,
Damn, this is
and
gonna get
instead of
bad.
fixing the problem, they threatened to fire him if he continued complaining. On top of the weight and the stability problems, the ship also seemed to have issues with its steering, further making it unstable and unable to
Of course it's gonna get bad. It's in the fucking title. What the fuck is wrong with me? They all...
maneuver properly. Regulation tests concluded that the ship was too heavy and less stable after modifications were made, but this analysis fell on deaf ears. To add to this, it was also learned that most of the crew on board had next to no training, some of them none whatsoever. So, as you can imagine, all of these issues had the potential to create a very hazardous situation. It was only a matter of time before the crew and everyone on board was faced with disaster. On the evening of April 15th, with 443 passengers, 33 crew members, 185 cars, and an assortment of other cargo totaling just over 2,100 tons, Sewol was finally set to depart. This was a routine trip that she made 3 times a week, and this journey of 13.5 hours each way had already been made more than 240 times before. Due to depart at 6:30 p.m, Sewol was delayed due to low visibility caused by fog. The warning was lifted at 8:35 p.m, allowing all vessels to plan their departure for 9 p.m. And although Sewol decided to leave, all other ships in the port chose to stay for the night. Rather than her usual Captain Shin, Sewol was captained by Lee Jong-seok, who was a 69-year-old seafarer with more than 4 decades of experience. He was standing in for the regular captain and had previously travelled this route before, and by the early hours of the morning, they had completed most of the journey without any incident whatsoever. As a brief side note, it is standard practice to have at least 2 people on the bridge at all times. One typically has to be an officer, and the captain can occasionally stand watch. Combined, they are also aided by a qualified helmsman to help steer the ship. At 8:46 a.m, and while manoeuvring through the main Ghoul channel, a turn of 5 degrees was requested, with a further 5-degree turn 2 minutes later. This is where the confusion began to build though, and would be the first step in the dance of disaster. After the second order was given, noticing that 10 degrees was causing the ship to lose stability, the main officer requested to negate the 5 degrees. Understanding the order incorrectly, the helmsman added an additional 5 degrees, causing the boat to steer a total of 15 degrees instead of 5. The result was a rapid 15-degree turn in just 40 seconds. Sewol listed heavily, turning even more and stopping any forward progress, which unfortunately caused it to list even further. By this point, a catastrophic chain of events was set in motion that would only worsen further. As Sewol tilted to her port side, the extreme angle forced the unsecured cargo to fall from one side of the ship to the other, shifting the center of gravity and forcing the vessel further into the list, therefore making it now impossible for her to self-right. By 8:50 a.m, Sewol was 30 degrees to port, and by this point all officers were on the bridge. The engines were stopped, removing the ability of the vessel to move on its own. The engine room was then ordered to be abandoned by the deck team. At this moment, announcements were made over the public intercom, advising all passengers not to move from their positions. The passengers, who were understandably panicked, generally obeyed this instruction. Amidst the widespread fear and confusion, the ship was now leaning at a terrifying angle, and unbeknownst to them at this point, but the boat was now beginning to sink. At 8:55 a.m, Sewol made its first call to the Korean Coast Guard. The ship reported that it was in danger, and in response, a patrol boat was swiftly dispatched to assess the situation. By 9:03 a.m, a representative from the ship's company was on the phone with the captain, the first mate speaking to the company rep 5 times over the next 35 minutes. 2 nearby vessels were also informed by the Jindo Vessel Traffic Service, also known as VTS, that Sewol was in danger of sinking. Despite one of these vessels being close enough to confirm visual contact with Sewol, Sewol never made any effort to call for assistance directly. At 9:07 a.m, the crew of MV Sewol officially requested the assistance of the Coast Guard, confirming that, unfortunately, they were now sinking. At 9:10 a.m, Sewol sent another message to Jindo VTS.
세월호 기사라고 있었어요. 그 소방관들 어떻습니까? 저는 지금 뭐 거의 움직이지 못하고 있습니다. 어떻게 해야 될까요? 지금 바다에 어디라고 모르겠네. 지금 서른도로 아이스크 작게 짓고 대기하라 했는데 서른도로 브릿지에 모여가지고 지금 거동이 움직일 수가 없는 상태입니다.
Another 5 minutes passed before Jindo contacted Sewol again.
여기 세월호입니다. 감독 있습니까? 세월호 진도랑 모이겠습니다. 그 인명 탈출시키는 거는 그 선장님께서 지금 직접 판단하셔갖고 지금 판단을 빠르게 하셔갖고 지금 하십시오.
By now, 33 minutes had passed since Sewol started displaying signs of a catastrophe. The ship's crew were instructed by onshore support to order all passengers to put on a life jacket and warm clothing. It was at this point that the crew incorrectly reported that the PA system was broken, which, by the way, was a total lie. And so, in response, onshore support ordered them to tell all passengers personally. After this, the captain asked to abandon ship, and one help would arrive. He was advised that rescue ships would take about 10 minutes to arrive, with helicopters due in less than 1 minute's time. The captain abandoned the vessel for his own safety. You heard that right, by the way. He abandoned all responsibility for protecting his passengers. So much for a captain going down with his ship, right? Having just arrived at the scene, Coast Guard Boat 123 was appointed incident commander. Which was very strange, by the way, because despite this fact, they never had any direct communication with Sewol. By 9:30, Sewol was informed that all nearby ships were volunteering to assist, and as such, were instructed to deploy all lifeboats. Sadly though, all communications were lost only 8 minutes later, and the ship's angle had become so bad that more than 100 people had jumped into the sea. By now, all crew members, including the helmsman, all officers, and even the captain had been safely rescued, abandoning more than 400 innocent people on board. Chaos and confusion amongst the passengers soared to an all-time high. Some remained where they were, as initially requested by the PA announcements, while others climbed upwards, putting as much distance between the waterline and themselves. Some even jumping into the waters in hopes of being rescued.
이런 상황에서 막 그러지 않냐? 안전하니까 가만히 있으라고. 그런 거 주는 거야. 지네끼리 나오고 영어 왜다 그러잖아. 그 지하철도 그렇잖아. 안전하니까 좀만 있어달라고 했는데 지하철 있었는데.
우리 진짜로 이만큼 귀여운 거야. 진짜야
나가
이거.
사람들을 살고.
By now, the South Korean Navy had involved itself, sending 2 patrol vessels to the scene. Coast Guard vessels shouted for passengers to abandon ship, while they began to rescue all of those who already were in the water. Sadly, due to how far Sewol was listing by this point, they had no prospect of getting on board themselves. Swimming away, some passengers climbed onto the Coast Guard boat, where they found the captain cowered in a corner. With all entry points inaccessible, all rescue efforts could only be made for those jumping into the depths of the Yellow Sea. And despite dozens of passengers doing so, many more remained trapped inside the Sewol as it began to sink, slowly but surely being dragged.
Motherfucker ain't no captain. He needs to have his captain stripes taken away from him. He's a little bitch. Captain always goes down with the ship, bruh. Gotta make sure your peoples are off and safe. If they ain't off, you ain't off. You stay there. You go down with everyone, little bitch.
To their underwater graves. Throughout this nightmare, many passengers were sending text messages and making phone calls back home. And of course, family and relatives were distraught to hear the news, seeking support wherever they could. Now, the initial formal response was that, although there had been an accident, everyone on board was safe and everybody had been rescued. These false reports were repeated throughout the entire day until the next morning, when suddenly, reports of bodies in the water became known. And as more facts emerged, shock, anger and despair all followed. By sunrise, hundreds of families hadn't heard from their children, and their silence was explainable for the most morbid of reasons. By 11:18, the stern was underwater. By noon, only half a meter of the bow could be seen above the waterline.
예, 지금 여객선에 우리 항공 구조단이 못 내려갑니까?
아직 못 내리고 앞에 선수만 남아있다던데 지금은 내릴지 못할 것 같습니다.
아까 진작 좀 내렸다고 그림이 됐어야 되는데 지금 그게 문제란 말이에요. 못 올라가면은. 우리가 올라가고 유도한 게 보여줬어야 되는데 승객들은 거의 다 나왔어요, 배에서?
예.
그러면 대부분 다 나왔다는 얘기예요? 선장님 없다는 이야기예요?
예, 그 전부터 계속 기울이면서부터 사람이 나와 있었기 때문에
예.
내부 수색은 정확하게 안 했는데
예.
거의 다 나간 걸로 지금 확인이 되는.
그러면은 첫날 일단 사람들이 거의 없는 걸로 봐야 되네요.
예, 예.
By 1 p.m, the ship had entirely sunk from view. Of the 170 survivors, more than half of them were rescued by commercial and fishing boats. The Coast Guard would arrive 40 minutes after these commercial vessels, and would only save the smaller half of these passengers. Despite a state of emergency being declared at 9:40 in the morning, the Special Welfare Branch of the Army only arrived after 2:30 p.m. Lateness aside, 110 members were deployed alongside 40 scuba divers, and the rescue operation was, to no surprise, absolutely enormous. When it comes to terrible facts, there were many more extremely hard pills to swallow. It turns out that the government repeatedly refused offers of help from any other nation. The government didn't want to appear weak or helpless, therefore deciding to favour
What the
reputation over their own civilians' lives. The general disorganisation and slow response to the disaster were also widely
Straight
criticised,
bullshit,
and
bro.
even after rescue efforts
cares?
ramped up, it became quite clear
Who cares if it makes you look weak? You ask for help. Those are your people. It makes you look weaker when everyone around you is dead, bro. Because then you ain't got no one. Fucking idiots.
that this would only be a recovery effort. President Park Geun-hye was put under the spotlight with much scrutiny too. It would later be revealed that she was nowhere to be seen for the first few hours after the incident, and was, quote, busy in her bedroom. She had both the power and the authority to provide clearance for more robust rescue measures, but instead, she personally requested that she was not to be disturbed throughout the morning. A presidential secretary even drove to her home shortly after 10 a.m. to address the incident. Despite the evident scale of the ongoing tragedy, Park would only visit the response center late that afternoon. She instead decided to have a haircut at 2:30 p.m. before leisurely making her way to the central disaster hub at 4:30. And even after this late arrival, she would only stay for a poxy 45 minutes. To the nation and the wider world, this was a terrible show of disinterest from the head of state, and was a slow response which likely cost many lives. By 6 a.m. the following morning, 29 aircraft.
Please tell me she lost her fucking job. Oh my. I am so angry. I am so fucking angry over this whole bunch of bullshit, and we haven't even got to the part where everyone's dead yet.
And 171 ships were involved in the rescue effort. And only when civilians were finally allowed to join in on the operation, the number of divers on site rocketed from 40 to 555. Despite the enormous rescue operation that, frankly, came all too late, all efforts had to be halted at 2 p.m. the next day due to bad weather on the horizon. By day 3, air was pumped into the Sewol to support any possible survivors in air pockets, though, sadly, this was in vain. Hundreds of bodies were found in and around the water as days turned into months. And sadly, this event would claim more lives too. 2 divers would lose their lives during the 6-week rescue operation, one through losing consciousness underwater, and the other through injury on the shipwreck. Even still, there was more death to come. On July the 17th, a helicopter carrying 5 firefighters back from the scene crashed into a building, killing all 5 on board.
What?
Honestly, when does this tragedy end? Ultimately, this event claimed 306 lives, 299 on board, 2 divers and 5 emergency workers, and still to this day, 5 people remain unaccounted for. President Park would eventually tearfully address the nation, speaking of the disaster and the country's fury towards the government. She said, "I apologize to the nation for the pain and suffering that everyone feels, and as the president, I should have been responsible for the safety and lives of the people. A 20-year-old vessel was bought and refurbished to increase capacity. Then it was loaded with much more cargo than allowed. Although there was a clear false report on its weight, no supervisor stopped to prevent it." In the following months, the South Korean government contracted the Shanghai Salvage Company to begin the salvage operation. 9 passengers still hadn't been found, but during the salvage operation, 4 of them would eventually be located and then identified through DNA testing. Sewol had settled on the seabed on its port side at a depth of 44 meters or 145 feet. It would take more than 3 years after the sinking to finally be raised, reaching the surface in March 2017. The original date of raising it was meant to be June 2016, but unfortunately, due to bad weather conditions, all salvage attempts had been hampered. The operation was also significantly more complex, because the government promised all victims' families that the Sewol would be raised intact. The first step was the installation of 33 subsea lifting beams. These had to be installed at critical points around the vessel, which involved digging at the seabed to get them underneath. Once this task had been completed, each end of each beam had a steel cable attached to it, and each steel cable was connected to an enormous barge on either side of Sewol. The barges began to pull away, taking up the slack of the 66 cables, and lifting the beams to raise the vessel off of the seabed. The weight of the wreckage by this point had increased to an estimated 8,500 tons, due to the silt and the debris that had entered it. Once it was raised to just below the surface, the operation was halted while a semi-submersible then raised it above the waves. And there, any remaining fuel and water were drained off of the ship. What was left of MV Sewol was then taken to the port of Mokpo, just over 50 miles away. The salvage operation was estimated to cost over $90 million and took more than 400 workers to complete. And yeah, I'm just going to talk here for a while longer, simply so you can see more pictures of the ship after it had been taken out of the water. Call it a personal opinion maybe, but shipwrecks look absolutely haunting to me.
Yeah.
Moving to the legal proceedings of this case, President Park describes
do.
the actions of Sewol's crew as akin to murder, and promised to prosecute anyone responsible. On May 15th, 2014, the captain and 3 other crew members were charged with murder, and additionally, 11 other crew members were charged with abandoning ship. Their prosecution makes legal...
The captain should be shot in his fucking face for being a coward-ass little bitch and leaving his fucking people to fucking die. Sorry. It makes me angry.
...sense too, as South Korean law contains this direct quote from the Seafarers Act. A captain shall not leave their ship from the time cargoes are loaded or passengers start to go on board until all cargoes are unloaded or all passengers leave their ship. At times when a ship is in critical danger, a captain shall take all measures necessary to rescue human lives, the ship, and cargoes. When confronted outside the courtroom by the press and the victim's family, Captain Lee said, "I am sorry, and I have nothing to say for myself. There is nothing I can say to them." Sewol's captain, Lee Jong-seok, was sentenced to life in prison. The chief engineer was sentenced to 10 years behind bars, and the captain of the first Coast Guard vessel on the scene, Kim Kyung-il, was sentenced to 4 years for negligence. To add to this, 13 other Sewol crew members received sentences varying between 18 months and 12 years. The man who was thought to be the owner of Chonghae-jin Marine, who was named Yoo Byung-eun, had an arrest warrant issued for him, but initially he couldn't be located. Eventually, in 2014, his body was found in a field. Despite her many failings throughout, President Park promised to disband the Coast Guard and pass its duties to a national emergency safety agency. She further vowed to find and eliminate what she described as corruption and collusion between companies and those that were supposed to regulate them, essentially trying to weed out the pursuit of profit at the cost of safety. For her own part, President Park's reputation took a massive hit due to her handling of the tragedy, and it only served to mark as the beginning of the end for her own political position. And as more and more scandals engulfed her, she was eventually ousted in the year 2017.
Good.
Understandably, this case rocked the nation of South Korea and those further afar, and personally, it's made me hate the sea even more. In the wake of any tragedy, such as MV Sewol, we are all left trying to understand why. Of course, investigations and reports can help us get a better idea, and experts can give us their best theories. But they can also look back and see the missed opportunities, and in this case, there were so many, peppered in with additional tragic stories. Things like training, poor certification, ignored safety limits, and an incredibly irresponsible captain all played massive roles to this tragedy. Resolving any of these things could have prevented a terrible disaster and the loss of hundreds of lives. But sadly, I'm here telling you this story instead. Sadly, the regulations made in many industries, including the maritime, are written in blood. In this case in particular, the blood of more than 300 innocent people are on the hands of these guilty parties, all of which who allowed these people to die through a lack of care. While every victim is a tragic loss, felt keenly by those that loved them, the community of Danwon must have been, and remains, completely devastated. The loss of so many high school children, still with their whole lives ahead of them and much more of the world to experience, is a hard loss that's almost impossible to comprehend. And although jail sentences, tighter regulations and apologies may help a slight little bit, it is hardly enough to make these grieving families ever feel whole again. So instead, the best that can be done is that we try to learn from dark days like this. We take the hardest of lessons and we use them to ensure that nothing like this will ever happen again. Anyway folks, I think that's the end of today's video. I'm going to wrap this one up here.
Alright. I really enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed that video. If you guys feel the same way I do about that video, go down there, hit that thumbs up button. While you're down there, go on over, hit that subscribe button. Become part of the Built 5000 Nation. We do some crazy shit here, bruh. Alright? Some crazy shit. Alright. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Man, what kind of captain abandons his ship? It's women and children first. Captain, no, you go down with that motherfucker. It's just how it is. He was a pussy.